this new guy Benji's going to sit in on the news. And we had such a well-oiled operation. Howard and Robin and me and Fred. And it was a perfect show. And everybody loved it. There was no room for improvement. There really wasn't. So all of a sudden they put this guy. I had no space at all. And all of a sudden I got this little chubby kid sitting next to me. And he's writing too. Meanwhile, I'm writing jokes. But I'm reading what I'm writing and what Fred's writing, deciding what to put up for Howard. So now I have to decide between me and Fred and what Benji's writing, which slows the process, so I had to, it just made it crazier. But I don't fault Benji because I scraped and clawed to get where I got. So I don't know whether he scraped and clawed to get there, but it was an annoyance, but it wasn't his fault at all. And that had nothing to do. I think that was Howard's agent's way of saying, look at this, we got somebody who can step right in and replace you. Nobody ever said that, but I knew better because, writing jokes was part of my thing, but leading the ball breaking and getting my balls broke myself and instigating and my good laugh, I added a lot more to the show than just my notes, which were a major thing. And there was no animosity between me and Benji. It had nothing to do with anything, So right away, and people are looking for stuff, like, oh, it's great you and Artie finally are talking again. I'm like, what are you talking about? I left in March, and Artie didn't come on the show till like October. There was no crossover whatsoever, and I was friends with a lot of the guys that they put in my seat to replace me. There was no. It was. I asked for more money from my boss, and they said no, so I went home with my football. That's not enough for people, but that's in essence what happened.
Yeah. Well, I always say, there's a Jackie era, there's an Artie era, and then there's what they're doing now. So I would call you and Artie's tied for first, and what they're doing now. Have you listened? It's just so not what I know. He's older, and the things change.
No, I don't talk. I've never listened to 1 second of it, but I don't know if I told you the last time I spoke to you, but I get ridiculous. I get fan mails from kids that weren't even born when I left the show, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around. But at one point, I got a fan email. I probably told you this already because it's still my favorite. He said, Jackie, I'm 28 years old, something like that, and I live in Toronto. And I discovered the Howard Stern show in 2007, long after I left. And he said, it immediately became my favorite show. He says, but then I found out about the old shows that were on from the 90s that were on YouTube and different places. And he said it's like having a new favorite band and finding out that their early albums were much better. I was like, whoa, I couldn't even craft that kind of compliment for myself. It's like, I love the show, but it's not, it's just a shell of its former self, which is, and that's, it's not fair to say that's a consensus, because that's the consensus of people that tell me. You know what I mean? Whether that's 1% of the people or 90% of the people, I'll never know. But for the most part, and in people's imaginations, the show gets better and better the longer time. People talk about the Channel 9 show we did like it was the epitome of television for the world. And you go back, some of the shows downright unwatchable. They were so horrible.
It is true.
It was so much fun because we had no budget. It was like we did a radio show that was like who was that guy that did, like Ed Wood? It was an Ed Wood radio show. With nothing to work with.
Well, Channel 9 shows how I got to hear you guys and see you guys, and I thought, what is this shit? I need more of it. And then the E! Show came. And it's funny you said that because I started watching a bunch of just old stuff from your era. And I think the side characters were great that you had versus, you had a Grillo and you even got a little bit of KC, but Ganji would come in and you guys were just unrelenting. Of course, Gary. Did you ever work with Beetlejuice? Did you get a chance to have him? And did you ever write for Beetlejuice? I've met.
He was on many times before I left. There wasn't a time he walked in where I wasn't like skeeved. Like you think you're ready for what you're going to see, and you're just not. But that was that wasn't the show. That wasn't me and Fred being really witty and funny and quick, and Howard riffing, and that was a freak show.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was so challenged, and so, I mean, I'm not Mr. Sensitive, but what was funny about him was that he was a circus freak.
Yeah.
And you ask him to recite the Declaration of Independence, anything he says is going to be funny, But after that, I wasn't around for when they started booking him at events, and I don't know if they took him to strip shows or whatever they did, I just, Beetlejuice, spell the word red, and he'd say zebra. You know what I mean? He was a moron, Nothing against him. It's not his fault,
I love him. Scott the Engineer, he's a guy who's been cast off. Do you get a chance to talk to him? You guys trade some stories at all now that he's been let go the way he was?
No, I mean, I'm not out of contact. We don't talk or anything, but he was going to come to see my show down in the Palm Beach Kennel Club last December, but he didn't come, but maybe he'll come this year. I think he's got a new girlfriend and stuff. He was always a really good guy, and he did a lot of favors for me, and I did favors for him, when we were on the show, but we weren't really close, and I did plenty to break his balls because that was my job, but he liked that because the infamy helped him with his business, he was doing DJing at the time, or, whatever it was.
Well, talk about, the E! Show, he was a star. You have the push-up challenge, you have him screaming at Ganji, just him going nuts at Ralph, or that was, and then you guys would pop in and just completely, it was the machine that you talked about. It really was fun. Nancy Sirianni's in the movie, your wife, which is one of the top, if you go look at top 10 moments of the show, read them off, it's always your apology, which was way back in the day, but it's pretty funny. Tell me, just having her on and how you guys talk, and about that day of the apology. I mean, just
she is still, I mean, I saw her, a few hours. She was here. She lives 2 doors away, her and her boyfriend. And her and her boyfriend are 2 of me and my girlfriend's closest, if not closest, friends. And, we still love each other. She's wonderful. She was a friend long before we were lovers and married and stuff like that. She's so great. And there's 2 complete chapters in my autobiography about that event. Because, the whole thing was portrayed so unfairly to her because she had nothing to do with it aside from getting mad at her boyfriend or getting mad at her husband. That whole thing, I don't know if you read the book, but we were scheduled to fly to Europe for 2 weeks. We're going on vacation, the show, and we're going to Europe for 2 weeks to see her sister get married in Paris, and then we were going to Venice. I mean, we hadn't been on a vacation like that ever. And we were supposed to leave, I think it was on a Friday, and I think the funeral was on a Wednesday, something like that. And, it happened so fast, the thing with Jessica, it was such a joke. I mean, me and Howard were in the bathtub with her for probably 20 seconds. And, we're sitting around getting drunk. We drove to Philadelphia, and we're in Howard's suite. And I know I'm drunk, and Billy doesn't drink, and Howard doesn't drink. But me and Gary and Fred and John, we're having a great time. We're excited. We're going to have a big funeral to celebrate being number 1. And Howard, out of the blue, calls up Jessica. And she, of course, was in the suite right next door. He said, Jessica, come on over and take a bath. And she said, okay. And so his suite was so big that it was down the hall, the bathtub. She's like, Howard, I'm in the bathtub. Come on down. And he's like, I can't go down there. My wife will kill me. And I said, well, I'll go. Because I figure I'm going to keep on my blue jeans and my underwear so there's no foul. So we go down there. A lot more. It was really funny because the tub was all drawn. Jessica's there in her bathroom, and the tub is drawn. And we threw Stuttering John in the water. And then when we pulled him out, the water was so filthy that we had to empty the tub and refill it. It was hysterical. And then she got in the tub, and she said, come on. So I took off my shirt or whatever, and me and Howard got in with her. I think he had on his underpants. I not only had on my underpants, I had on my blue jeans. We got in the tub, and I'm not thinking anything of it. Well, when the mics opened up the next morning at 6:00, I don't know if I ever went back and listened to it, but Howard made it sound like it was a full-scale orgy, like unbelievable, like. And of course, my wife was not listening, but her friends were listening. So by the time it got Howard's version of the story related to Nancy by way of her friends, you know, I don't know what the hell she thought, but I just know I got off the air and she was on the phone, and I never heard anybody so mad at me. She was out of her mind, just out of her mind, and I didn't know what to do. And I got home, and I thought she was going to kill me. And it was really funny because she got in the car and took off, and I went to open my suitcase, and Stuttering John had put Jessica's wet pink negligee in my suitcase, which is a great, great stunt. But if I had to open that with her standing there, I'd be dead. You know, and I threw that thing away, and I called our therapist. We used to go to couples therapy. I don't think we were even doing it anymore. I told her the situation, and Emily, our therapist, said, Jackie, you got to get Nancy on that plane. Do whatever you can to get her on that plane. Once you're in that plane and you're on your way to Europe, they'll just all melt away, and you'll be off on your vacation. And that was her. And so in my mind, I'm like, what could I possibly do? And that's what I came up with. And next morning, the first thing I said, Howard, turn on the mic. And off the top of my head, I just did the most sincere apology. And I really meant it because I really didn't think I had done anything wrong. But, you know, we all know what you think and what your girlfriend or your wife thinks. You know, everybody has a different interpretation. So I couldn't have been more sincere. But, of course, they played it like Nancy put a gun to my head and said, you better apologize on the radio. You know, so that was all malarkey. But meanwhile, we wound up getting on the plane and had the greatest vacation in the world. So, you know, of course, you would never know that from the show, but it had a really happy ending, and it was a really incredible. The funeral for DeBella it's so funny. Coincidentally, I think last Friday was John DeBella's last day on the air. I think he officially retired last Friday, which is how funny is that, you know? But
still doing it.
That's what happened. That's what happened.
You mentioned Stuttering John. He's in the film. You keep in touch with him. It seems like he's kind of gone off the deep end a little bit, maybe.
I was in touch with him, but I'm not really anymore. He can get pretty weird. I don't talk about it, but we were very good friends for a long time. You know, he wanted to. His girlfriend wanted to move to Long Island. He said, "I'm only moving to Long Island if we can move to Bayville." So they came to Bayville, and they lived here for a couple of years. And so me and Nancy and John and Susanna, we were very close, and we had a lot of good times. And he's a good guy. He's smart, you know. He's a hustler. He's okay. But, you know, I don't quite agree with everything he does, but not many people agree with the things I do, so who am I to talk?
Well, that's a good point. I love when you tell me a Robin story. So any Robin stories that come to mind? You two were so tight and so close and had so much fun as we wrap.
The funniest thing of late, she actually took me to lunch however many years ago, but she was trying to get me to join that forum thing or whatever thing that she's in. I was like, Robin, I love you, and you know, I'll buy lunch, but I'm not joining any wacka doodle, you know those groups, whatever. You know, you find your soul, and you know, please, you know, talk to people and be nice to people. That's all you got to do. But I do Cameo.com, right? And I've done, I don't know, 500, 700 of them. And people yell at me. They say, you don't charge enough money, because some people charge like $500. I don't know if you know what it is, but it's a thing where people pay money for you to do a little iPhone video for them. Like if your friend said, hey, it's Brad's birthday. Hey, Brad, happy birthday. And I'll tell a few dirty jokes and fool around. Maybe they'll give some inside information. I'll break your balls. And it's like 2 or 3 minutes. And I only charge $75. And the fans of the show they eat it up. They love it, you know. They'll say, you know, they give me little snippets of things to say about this or somebody like this. Last week, a guy said it's my father's birthday, and me and him used to scream. My father's turning 85, and we used to scream when you read from Robin's book. I don't know if you know about that. He said, would you do that for him? And I said, you know what? That's the weirdest. And I looked at my computer, and I still had the pages I had scanned, because I'd actually taken a few pages and scanned them so they'd be easy to read on the air. And I went a little wild with it on his cameo. And the guy tipped me like $100. He was over the moon. But I got to tell you the truth, man. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We walked down the street and my legs were so long and my minis. Oh God, just hysterical fun. You know, it's just totally everything comes out of goofing. You know, we were in a limo going to a movie screening, and the movie screenings we used to go to were like a couple of blocks away. But Howard couldn't walk, so 4, 5, 6 of us would pile into the limo, like Howard and Robin and me and Fred and maybe Gary, or whatever. We're all jammed in there. And we're going a couple of blocks in midday in Midtown. So we're stuck in traffic. We're not going anywhere. And we're all like climbing the wall. And I had my bag, my canvas bag, and I looked down and Robin had just given me a copy of a book. And I just reached in and took it out and opened it at random and started reading it in her voice, and they went bat crap. They went nuts. And of course, then I did it on the air, you know, however many times before Howard realized I was getting too many laughs, and then we stopped doing that. But people loved it.
And I don't think he was always pleased with what we did. But we basically had free reign to report on everybody, perhaps other than Howard. It's not like Howard said you can't report on, you know, it's just we didn't investigate the hell out of the guy. But we did go after and reported a lot on all the other people on the show, and they were not always happy with me. But you may remember the Robin Quivers, Jim Florentine romance. And, you know, I mean, we actually put a promo on the news because we wanted to report on this developing story. You know, what was going on with these two. It was a great story. I mean, Florentine is an amazing comedian. Robin Quivers is an extraordinary individual who's not always easy to get along with, but really an amazing human being. Anyway, they were dating. And so we put a promo on Howard 100 News. We're covering the romance, budding romance of Jim Florentine and Robin Quivers. If you see anything happening anywhere, call us on the Howard 100 News tip line, 877, whatever it was. And we got calls from everyone. Everything they did, we got a call on. And Robin was not too happy.
I was a huge fan of this era when Artie came in 01, and then you guys go to Satellite, and it was just hilarious. But everyone has to obviously understand that Artie, there's something going on with Artie, but Howard doesn't want to talk about it. Tell me how hard it was to sort of not be able, I know even Lisa G was saying, I have a file, and I'd be interested to hear about that file, I guess. But tell me what you thought about those days where, you know, Artie's falling asleep, he's not showing up, and everybody's asking these questions. Can the news team find out? How is it to deal with all that?
Well, up until the end, Artie, even in good days, really liked to control. He didn't like being covered by somebody like me because I would report what happened. You know, I reported what I saw, and he didn't care for that. And it was not always flattering, obviously. I mean, I remember one time toward the end there where he was doing an appearance in Philadelphia, a book signing, I think. And I went over to Hoboken, I think, and there was a party bus. We were supposed to leave, and the book signing in Philadelphia was, say, 7 o'clock or something like that. And 6 or 6:30 or something. And Artie's clowning around and we're not actually going to the book signing. We got hundreds of people waiting for him at a bookstore in Philadelphia. And I'm just like, what is this? You know, is this the way you treat your fans? And I reported that.
I mean, everybody now is wondering, where is he? I'm sure you probably don't have a chance to talk to him or have his number, but you are a hard scrabble journalist. You got to find out where he is, Steve. What do you know about him? Do you know anything about him? What was the last contact you had with him? And where is he? What can we do? He showed up doing a podcast, nose all messed up, and now we don't know where he is.
I have no idea. I mean, I covered the Stern Show when I was there, and now I don't cover that beat anymore. So I don't know. And Artie and I were obviously not friends.
Yeah, I mean, that's really enterprising journalism, as they say. So what is a day, a week like there where you guys come in on a Monday or maybe you have a meeting on a Thursday? Here's what we're going to cover. How does the news team decide? I mean, you got to come in every day and have a news update. You and Lisa G were basically the two guys, or two news people coming in and doing that. I mean, what is that like? I mean, you're just sitting on the phone all day, and are you listening to the show, and is someone pitching you? I mean, Jason. I'm sure Jason Kaplan probably just threw you stuff to do because he was one of those gossip guys. But
You're listening to the show a lot because Gary, reminds me of a story like one afternoon as we're churning out material all day long, and one day Gary calls me and says, "I don't know whether you'd be interested in this story, but I'm going to run for a position on the town council in Greenwich, Connecticut, where I live." And I just, in my gut, I knew immediately. I think I knew more than Gary knew that this was going to be a great story. And so sure enough, Gary says a couple of weeks later, he says, "Listen, we're having this meeting where I'm going to introduce myself to the people on the town council in Greenwich as I run for this position on the Parks and Recreation Commission. So would you like to come and cover it?" And there'll be a reporter there from the Greenwich paper and, whoever else wants to cover it. I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And I have my microphone. Everybody knows I'm a reporter. And Gary gets a question from one of the council members, a woman, who says, "Mr. Dell'Abate, I've been reading up on your background. And I understand you're with the Howard Stern show. Now, it seems I've learned that included in your duties, at one point you were throwing lunch meat at a woman's rear end." Well, I'm holding the microphone, trying not to cry, because it was so surreal and funny. And Gary is like, I'm going to try to explain this. And I knew right away that this was absolute gold. So sure enough, the next day on the Stern show, it was. And I covered the story from there on. It was just extraordinary.
That is hilarious. But on the converse side, you've got Richard and Sal, and I'm sorry, you do have this call from Sour Shoes that comes in that's not actually Sour Shoes. Can you laugh about that now looking back? Because I mean, this thing was played over and over.
Yeah, I know. I often tell Gary that I did 6 years of a lot of really great reporting, and the only damn thing they play is that alleged prank phone call.
What was that like? I mean, to know that they got you, and not only did they get you, it's some people do a practical joke and then it's over, but this thing is going to be played now I mean, you just hear how Sour Shoes.
Well, listen, worse things have happened on that show, but I got to tell you, I like pranks, and I mean good pranks. I often said that calling me 300 times while I'm trying to get my work done is not necessarily a prank. In fact, I asked Howard at the time. I said, "Okay, this is really funny. Give me your phone number, Howard, and I'll call you 300 times over the next couple of weeks, and we'll have a great laugh about it."
How was your relationship with Lisa G when you worked there, and now it's like the two of you are really the two that kind of got big because you came in every day.
Listen, we sat beside each other. We got along just fine. But we were very different. I mean, her reporting, my reporting was they were very different, those styles.
So tell me, we talked about George Takei, but I think that was part of the reason what happened for you not to stay there longer, right? So I think there was a moment where maybe your daughter wanted to do. Tell me a little bit. Okay, yeah, let's clear that up then. So what brought this period in your life to an end?
No, in fact, no. That had absolutely nothing. No, I'll explain that, but no, that had absolutely nothing to do with me leaving. The reason I left is that my sense was that Howard was losing interest in the news team. And that is his right. It is his show. It is the most successful show in the history of radio. So I had 5 or 6 really good years there. But wherever I work, if I get a sense that there's so much interest in what we do anymore, I want to move on. So that was the single reason why I left. I'm not sure they were pleased when they knew I was leaving. But it was time for me to go. But in terms of the George Takei thing, I mean, listen, part of it's shtick. Who who the hell knows? But, you know, Howard said something about, I asked George if my young daughter could interview him briefly on the phone about the internment camps. And Howard was like, you know, how dare you? And I was like, well, first of all, Howard, I'm not sure you should be getting my children involved on the Stern Show, because obviously it was our policy and practice never to talk about his children.
So what was that? What was those early days like? Because from what I remember, the news team kind of came on the air before Howard even could go on the air. He started at 1906. Everybody remembers that. But Sirius, his channels kind of went live, I believe, September, October. And the first thing I think people heard was like Ralph Howard and this news team, and you guys start reporting. So give me just that background of just that starting. It's basically a startup news company with a startup Howard Stern channel that, you know, most startups don't get this sort of backing, but you know that people are going to be listening.
Yeah, it was extraordinary how people listened. We got there. We were mostly hired around the same time, a bunch of us. And my attitude was, well, I don't go into every job like this, but in that job, I knew exactly what to do. Just tell stories with a lot of color. And so I didn't ask anybody what to do. I just did it. And it was great because it was a blank slate. And by and large, nobody ever said anything about, you know, how you're supposed to do it. I knew how to do it, and I did it. Not everybody liked it, but that's the way I do news. So one of the first memories of being there at the beginning, it was only a few days in, and we were jammed in this tiny little newsroom on the 36th floor at Sirius, and we had not met Howard Stern yet. None of that I know of. I certainly have. And Howard Stern and Ed Bradley march into this tiny room. And Ed Bradley says, well, Howard, what's going on here? And Howard says, well, this is actually our new news team. We just hired these people, and they're reporting on everything going on in the world of Howard Stern. And Ed Bradley says to Howard, as the cameras were rolling, well, what are they reporting on right now? And he said, well, actually, I think they're reporting on something called the Craptacular that we're doing live. There's a man in an apartment in Queens. And, well, to make a long story short, we're having this man fed live on the air, live on Howard 101, I guess, for 24 hours straight. We're feeding food as we can, and we have a portable toilet in the apartment, and we're going to see how much he can produce. And we're all betting on how much he will produce. And Ed Bradley looks at him as the cameras are rolling and goes, well, what exactly is so funny about that? At which point, even the camera guys couldn't hold it together. They were laughing so hard. It was great.
And George Takei was another one you got the chance to cover a lot. I know you really have a special place for him because of some of the stories you got to do with him. It became more of a thing. This would be one of those where you could say, listen, this is way out of the Howard Stern universe. I could do this at any time. Tell me a little bit about that relationship.
So one day, you know, George would be there at the show, and he was funny as hell, and, you know, he was a great, great man. Is a great, great man. But I read something about, you know, we knew in the background that he'd been imprisoned in an internment camp in the West during World War II as a Japanese American. And then I read this line that he and his family, when he was 5 years old, before they were sent to the camps, they were forced to live in a horse stall at a racetrack in Los Angeles. And that just hit me. I went and saw George, and I said, what on earth would... And it occurred to me that we could do, because radio is easier than television in terms of production, we could do a documentary about his childhood. And he agreed. And so I went to Los Angeles. I spent an entire day with him and Brad, his spouse. And we drove around Los Angeles to all these locations. We went to George's home, where the Takei family had lived in April of 1942. Nice little home in East LA, I think it was. And George had not been back since that time. And just like U.S. soldiers banged on the door in April of 1942 and told the Takei family at gunpoint, "You're coming with us," because they were Japanese American. We banged on the door. There was a gentleman who opened the door somewhat bewildered, like, what are these people doing? And why is George Takei at my door? But George explained very clearly that, I lived here in 1942. This is where U.S. soldiers took us. And could we come in? And the man said, of course. And so, it was extraordinary to see and to record and to George reliving that. And then we went all around Los Angeles to the downtown where they put them on buses. They took them to a native racetrack where George and his family lived in a horse stall like animals for several months before being taken on trains with the blinds down so that nobody could see them and they couldn't see out, and they were taken to prison camps in Arkansas and Northern California, I think it was. So I did a radio documentary about it, and I was very proud of it.
Yeah, no, I was just saying thank you because I loved that show, and to me, it was a big part of it. Like when you'd come in and you had your own song, probably won't sing it here, but it makes you laugh, and that's a good song to have kind of be your song, right?
It was, I was, when Howard first confronted me on the air with that, I immediately denied that it was true. Of course, only I would do that. But, Stal and Richard immediately made a jingle, and Howard played that jingle every single time I went in the studio.
Well, I would take that jingle, and if you haven't heard it, then you're not a Stern fan, but it's a wonderful jingle. I thank Steve Langford for joining me. This has really been an honor. I appreciate his time. And again, Masses Restaurant's my sponsor, stlmasses.com. You can go to that website, find their menus here in St. Louis. If you're watching around the world, dip in through St. Louis, and they'll get you set up. Tell them you saw Here's the Pitch with Steve or any of the guests you've seen here before. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.